Steve, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the second session of Linda Wohlbohr-DeVelder's presentation on the Cooper Union speech, the Lincoln's greatest speech. As you may know, Linda is a graduate of Hope College and also has an MA and PhD from the University of Chicago, is an experienced literature educator, and we're so pleased to have her back for the second session here. As Susan has said, let's try to use the chat function if we have any questions, and let's get started.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to see the faces in front of me as I just look at the gathering of you. I won't see you during the presentation because I'll be looking at the video and I'll be looking at other things. So Steve will receive your questions as we just said, and we'll just go ahead today, pick up where we left off. To review just a little bit from last week, we were talking about the position that Douglas holds about popular sovereignty, and of course the case that Lincoln is now making. That's going to say popular sovereignty is hogwash, and my position is that Republicans have a consistent, clear position that is in line with the forefathers, and he's going to try to make that case. So I'm going to hold up right now some cards that I think at the beginning Douglas would feel that he has in his hand. These are the cards that Douglas thinks he has in his hand in seeking the presidential nomination. And I hope you can see this. There's a card called, well, let me ask, can you see these?
Yes.
All right. How many of these cards in his speech so far has Lincoln picked off and put in his hand? Any of them?
The fathers.
Okay, the forefathers. He has picked off the forefathers. That's the #1 goal of what he's doing in the first part of the speech. Any of these others that Douglas thinks he's got on his side and Lincoln's going to pick off?
Yeah, Jefferson and Washington.
Jefferson and Washington. There go two Virginians. Bye-bye. They're going over to the Republican side for Lincoln's Lincoln's side. What do we have left?
Oh, the Constitution.
Well, the Constitution as a whole. Yes, go ahead.
No, that's all I was going to say is the Constitution.
Okay. And in particular, he has dwelt upon the amendments to the Constitution. He has pointed out that the very same Congress that passed the Constitution in 1787, 88, and 89 also passed the enforcement of the Northwest Ordinance, which prohibited slavery in the territories. So he has picked off the 10 amendments. He has said that the 10 amendments are necessarily consistent with the Constitution because the same 76 men passed the whole package. So he's picked that off, Constitution. What do we have left here? This one about what position does Douglas hold at this point right now?
He's a senator.
A senator. Would he be considered a big time senator of the ranks of Mitch McConnell or something like that? Or would he be just a newcomer senator? How would you characterize that?
Well, he ended up running for president in 1860, so he was pretty famous, wasn't he?
Famous, absolutely pretty famous. He had been the primary sponsor of the whole Kansas-Nebraska Act, which became the powder keg that tore everybody apart as it put on the table the cancellation of the Missouri Compromise line, that geographic line that had from 1820 delineated slavery cannot move north past this certain line. And now with the Missouri Compromise, that was washed away. And many people were very alarmed and infuriated by that. And what else had he presided over? Well, he was chairman of the Committee on Territories in the Senate. That's like being right now chairman of the Judiciary Committee as we find out what's in Trump's tax returns. What is he going to do about it? He's in a very powerful position and so forth. So is he after Douglas's particular reputation as a very well-known politician?
Yeah,
You know, Lincoln is a relatively unknown Westerner at a time that Douglas is a big time senator known all over the country, North and South.
Yep.
So it's like a David and Goliath, really, a reverse. Douglas is the little giant. He's only 5'4". Think about this. Douglas is 5 feet 4 inches tall, and Lincoln, I believe, was 6'4". There's a complete foot difference in their heights. So imagine how they looked standing together on the stage. And Douglas is all frilled out in his ruffled shirt. And Lincoln, the only thing ruffled about Lincoln is his hair. And the difference had to be dramatic. We talked last week about Matthew Brady's ability to make a presidential figure of Lincoln through the portrait that he took that day, and also Lincoln's demeanor and his obvious command of style, of oratory. And Douglas had complimented Lincoln as being this dry, witty stump speaker, like, yeah, he knows how to tell funny stories and make you laugh, and like he's sort of an entertainer, a glad-hander, and he can get a few laughs. That's a very backhanded compliment, isn't it?
Yes.
Douglas's own compliment toward Lincoln does not give him stature as an orator, whereas I think Douglas thinks that he has stature, as we say, if not height, as an orator, but Lincoln's going to pick that off as well. Because what does he actually say about Douglas's position? Remember, in the beginning of the speech, Lincoln said, my facts are going to be dull and boring. He didn't say boring, but he said, I'm going to be going over facts that to many of us are well known, like the contents of the Ordinance of 1787 and the contents of the Constitution and what are the 10 amendments. Many of us know these facts, he says in the beginning, but what's going to be novel in my speech is the inferences that I make from the facts. The facts are known, but we're going to go over familiar facts that I know that Douglas should know, since he's a big-time senator and also a lawyer, and presents himself as a politician telling the truth. What does he say Douglas has done with those facts? Completely twisted them. He says Douglas should know that the founding fathers had every intention of controlling slavery in the territories because they did so. They didn't just say it, they did it. And then he repeats that and proves it over and over again. So now that he has said that the fathers limited slavery, they believed they had every right to do so, and that it was the pathway to peace for the country as a whole. And so now what he has characterized popular sovereignty as something new, radical, different, never heard of it before. He just got done saying that nobody ever heard of popular sovereignty before 1850, and that's factually correct. They've heard of democracy, which means the same thing as popular sovereignty. Popular, the people, and sovereignty, rule. Demo, the people, and cresci, have the rule. Even the word republic means the people rule. So they all, in their roots, mean the same thing, but popular sovereignty is the newborn baby that just got here. Nobody's ever propounded popular sovereignty before. So in effect, he's calling Stephen Douglas deliberately a fake. Now, from what some of you know this background, really well, probably better than I do because you're historians and I'm an English teacher talking about rhetoric here. But what is it about that made Lincoln call him a fake? And everything that Douglas said, fake news, let's say. He's really maligning Douglas's character here. He's not just saying, I have this opinion and he has that opinion, and my opinion is not an opinion. It's a fact. It's based on facts. He's made that case. Now he's turning and saying, and Douglas is deliberately misleading the public and knows that he is doing so. That's a pretty nasty claim, not unheard of in presidential elections, as we all know. After all, when Jefferson was running for president against Adams, he called Adams a hermaphrodite and other nasty terms. If you don't know what hermaphrodite is, look it up. But they were pretty nasty toward each other. And John Adams is called names by Jefferson. And Jefferson was called his own share of names. He was accused of having French mistresses and all manner of other slutty things that could be said about any politician. So it's not that every old political election rhetoric of the past was so nice and polite and clean. That's not the American way. And of course, cartoons and comical representation of the political candidates is nothing new. I'm sorry to tell you this, but we all know this. As a matter of fact, I just discovered yesterday that during the Civil War, Lincoln's own general, McClellan, had called Lincoln a well-meaning baboon. A well-meaning baboon. And Southern comic strips type caricatures of Lincoln portrayed him as a monkey. So there's nothing more cruel than a political cartoon that's really going to go after a laughable. I mean, most of us think that some of what comes off on Saturday Night Live and so forth is pretty cruel and meaningless, taking a jab at someone. But here is Lincoln trying to, in a high class way, call Douglas's position impudent absurdity. And so he's trying to take down Douglas's stature as a credible, well-meaning politician. Well, he's in the aftermath of this speech. He's going to be able to back that up. So let's say that the attack on Douglas's stature as a politician, we have one left, and what is this one? Has Lincoln done, obviously, when people try to support a position in politics, they many, many times like to find some forefather who agrees with them. I don't care who it would be. Every politician probably cites Jefferson, Washington, nowadays Lincoln, and other great memories of the past, Franklin. They're all quoted in many political speeches as being on the side of whatever cause the politician is promoting. But a background to this is that, I think as we said last week, throughout the North and the South, there was a very full-throated and fierce competition for the Bible that people were carrying on between North and South. What do I mean?
I think Lincoln doesn't rely much on the Bible because the Bible does not condemn slavery. The Bible assumes, as it was a cultural part of its time, that slavery was part of culture, part of the political structure, that if a nation or a group of people conquers another nation, they can become slaves of the conquerors. It was an accepted way of life at that time. So that's why I think Lincoln does not appeal to the Bible in this. He appeals much more to the fathers of the country. I think the southern states would have the Bible on their side and they could cite chapters and verse. And that's why I think Lincoln's not going to go there.
I'm really glad you said it that way. And I agree with you that the Bible doesn't come into this particular speech in any direct way at all. I don't see anywhere that he's using any Bible story or analogy or a biblical quote from a biblical figure. He's not making this a battle for the Bible. But in the background, there's a battle for the Bible going on, just as there's a battle for who's got more of the Constitution on their side. And Douglas was claiming, you know, here in what Lincoln is doing, he's claiming Douglas has the Constitution, is claiming he has the Constitution on his side. Specifically, states' rights is embedded in Article 5 and 10 of the Bill of Rights. And we'll go back to that in a minute. Those are the places that had been quoted by the Supreme Court of the United States and Douglas in support of popular sovereignty and the Dred Scott decision and the overall belief that that the South was now promoting that slavery is a positive good for mankind, that God invented slavery for the good of mankind. Lincoln does say that the South has gone to that position. Now that would be a question of what does the Bible say about this? What Judy expressed just a minute ago was the general opinion of some people. And of course, we all know that like Hagar was a slave of Abraham's, and that throughout the Bible, the word servant often means slave. It's just been put in a more gentle way and so forth. But a real battle for the Bible was going on. Specifically, the Southern preachers in pulpits were saying that the Bible says that all evil comes from disobedience, as in the Garden of Eden, and therefore all misery of slaves comes from disobeying their divinely appointed masters. They were making a total analogy of that kind to say that slaves suffer because they're disobedient to their masters. Who had opposed that? Well, Theodore Weld, a leading abolitionist and Presbyterian trained minister, wrote a book called The Bible Against Slavery. And he took every single element from the Bible that the Southern orators had hauled up in support of slavery, like servants obey your masters, says St. Paul. And that means if slaves just obey their masters, everybody will be happy. Just like you would tell a rebellious high school kid, if you would just sit in your seat and do what you're told, everything would be peaceful around here and you would get an education. So the Southerners were trying to purport that kind of idea in order to take the extreme position that God loves slavery and tag it with what I call BTMS, Bible tells me so. The Bible tells me so. Slavery is right because the Bible tells me so. And then to take the position that the Bible contains everything that man needs to know about God. So if you just consult the Bible, you don't need all your pretended facts. You don't need all your pretended experts. All you really need is the Bible. And the Bible says, servants obey your masters. Therefore, slavery is good. Slavery is intended for the good of mankind. And Lincoln says in this speech, if slavery is good, then it should be spread. But if slavery is evil, then it should not be spread. And so in this next section that he's going to develop in the speech, he's going to say, because the forefathers believed that slavery is inherently evil, therefore the Bible is also, they are using the Bible as their background, and he could back that up too, to say that slavery is evil and should be abolished and should not be allowed to spread. So in the background, there's the Bible standing there that both sides are quoting and fighting for and wishing to propose. And in Weld's very interesting book, The Bible Against Slavery, he's a trained theologian and he will go deliberately into the context and background of each of those clobber verses that the Southern proponents had come up with, get up on their stumps in the slave compound and say, now all you slaves, the only reason you have any miseries is because of disobedience. And then take that apart by talking about other aspects of the Bible. Okay, so I'm just characterizing this as a process in his rhetoric of Lincoln, one after the other, taking the cards out of Douglas's hand and putting them into his hand, so that now when we get done, Lincoln's holding all these cards. And that's the kind of rhetorical coup that I think takes place with this speech. And not only do I think so, but as we look at the results of this speech, we find that yes, the Republicans were unified by this speech. They did leap to the opportunity to nominate Lincoln for president. And what happened to Douglas? In May of 1860, Douglas goes down to Charleston, hoping that in the Democratic convention that's going to nominate a candidate for president, this is the golden egg that he's been looking for throughout his Senate career. He comes to Charleston, and many of the people, up to 10,000 people, had read the Cooper Union speech by now. Douglas's rhetoric was that powerful in the public imagination. And as Lincoln pointed out, 1.5 million people in the North, that may not sound like a big number, but it was in those days for that purpose, had already voted anti-slavery positions. So Douglas goes to Charleston. There are 57 ballots trying to get a candidate they can agree on, and they couldn't, so they disbanded. So then the Northern Democrats go, there's another convention in Baltimore. And again, they try and try and try to focus on one candidate. Why won't they choose Douglas? Douglas said, let the people decide in each territory, let them vote. And if there are enough slaveholders there or slave sympathetic people, they'll just vote that state a safe state. The Southerners weren't having any of that position. They wanted a moral position that slavery is right. They didn't want Douglas's two-timing, mealy-mouthed, I'm neutral on slavery position. You had to be the virtue of slavery proponent in order to win the Democratic nomination. So in Baltimore, they split apart again. They can't do anything. Only this shrunken little group of Northern Democrats are left. And they put Douglas up as their nominee. Okay, so now the Northern Democrats have their nominee. And what happened to the Southern Democrats? They nominated somebody else. So now the Democrats have put up two candidates.
A house divided.
A house divided. Well, the Democrats are divided. And now, well, the North then, the band of northern states, including the border states, Kentucky and so forth, are going to be kind of divided. Their leading contenders are going to be Lincoln and Douglas. There's going to be some support for Douglas's position. But down south, who's going to be opposed? Breckinridge and John Bell. So Breckinridge, pro-slavery, John Bell, pro-slavery, both contending for the Southern votes. You're going to have this interesting little jigsaw puzzle. But since the Republicans with Lincoln had banded together, what percentage of the popular vote did Lincoln get in 1860? Does anybody know or remember?
35%?
Did you say 35?
Yes.
Very close, 39%. Lincoln won the presidency with 39% of the popular vote. And who was second in place? Douglas, with about 28% of the vote. So look at that. If the Democrats had been able to unify around Douglas, if Douglas had had a position that would sell both to the Northern Democrats and to the Southern Democrats, they very well might have won the presidency because they only needed another 10% of the votes to, match or exceed what Lincoln could get together. But Lincoln won with a plurality, but not a majority of the general vote in 1860. And that's because the Democrats couldn't hold their party together. This goes back to the importance of this Cooper Union speech in unifying the Republicans around a pure position that slavery is evil by nature. Completely evil. Remember the statement from the House Divided speech that we quoted last week. It's evil for the slave, but it's not just that the slave is a victim and is suffering. It's also evil for the white man. Lincoln, like Frederick Douglass, now that other tremendous orator who just, the little giant was dwarfed standing next to Frederick Douglass. If you put Frederick Douglass next to Stephen Douglas, you would again have Frederick Douglass was almost 6'4". And you have the little giant here, a foot shorter, and also a foot shorter and coming up short in the power of his arguments. Because Douglas also was saying slavery degrades the white man. slavery also degrades the Negro. The conditions of slavery do degrade the Negro and the Negro's character, and that is one reason that it's purely wrong, and that slavery creates a state that cannot live in peace. So in his House Divided speech, Lincoln had not just said, well, you can't have a country where some people believe it's right and other people believe it's wrong. Why can't you have that? We have a country where people disagree on lots of things about whether it's right or wrong. Abortion, divorce, back in the past, mixed marriage, back in the past, integrated housing. Some people think it's right and some people think it's wrong. Segregated schools. Why can't you have a country with people who have opposite opinions? Because, said Lincoln in the House Divided speech, each side threatens to take over the other. And specifically, Lincoln believed in the House Divided speech of 1858 that the South had a distinct collusion of politicians to force slavery upon the North, force slavery into the North. As we said last week, the Dred Scott decision was about whether a Southerner can take his slaves into a Northern state and force the Northern state to accept his presence there with his plantation and everything that goes along with slavery. Why? Because of states' rights. Well, what about the rights of Massachusetts to forbid slavery? Oh, well, this one state doesn't have a right to impose its will on another state. Well, that lasts until the South wishes to capture northern states, bring slaves into northern states, and create new slave states as they go along. Did you know that at one time the Southerners wanted to take over Cuba and make it a state? How many of you knew that at one time the plan was to make Cuba a new state so they could keep the balance of slave and free states? And what state did they take that wasn't part of the US in the beginning, that became the 11th slave state to come into the Union? Clue, in 1846. Texas. The Mexican-American War. Oh, sorry, that's my phone, sorry. The Mexican-American War was about seizing territory from Mexico in order to create the state of Texas, in order to bring Texas into the Union as a slave state. And who was one of the senators, who was one of the members of the House that voted against the Mexican-American War? Abraham Lincoln. And what is one reason that he lost re-election for his seat in 1846? Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln lost political support, political support in 1846 because he took the brave step of voting against the Mexican-American War because he believed it was immoral to seize territory from Mexico upon which we had no real claim. And he also didn't want this contest to get started of the South trying to spread and create new states going southward to keep up with the North in creating new slave states. In other words, in the House Divided speech, Lincoln was saying that would be fine if each side would say, well, we'll just go our own way. But the states are too interconnected. They're too much dependent on each other. And at some point, the fugitive slaves have a right to be free once they reach the North. But no, that was something about this, which the South was absolutely adamant, that not only could they send slave catchers north to recapture their slaves, and there would be nothing any northern state could do about that, but they wanted northern judges. If a slave catcher came and caught a slave who was hiding next door to you, that slave could be hauled into the Grand Haven courthouse. And even though Michigan is a free state, those judges in Grand Haven would be forced to send that slave back to his master down in Alabama or wherever, because Michigan had no right to protect runaway slaves. And that infuriated people. They were very angry in Michigan and every northern state that now you had no right to help a runaway slave in the northern states. What did the slaves have to do, therefore, to get really free?
Go to Canada.
They had to go to Canada. That's the only place where slavery was truly illegal and the courts would protect the runaways. And then after 1850, when that fugitive slave law was again reinforced and more vigorously carried out. People like Frederick Douglass had to leave the United States if they wanted to be free. In 1845, when Douglass published his narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, people said, "You're not really a slave. You speak way too well to be a credible slave. You're a fake. You couldn't speak this well if you had grown up as a slave." And Douglass said, "I am a fact." And so the journalists went down south and found his old master, Thomas Auld, and they said, "Hey, what do you say about the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass?" And what did Thomas Auld say? "I'm sending out my thugs to go and recapture him." Well, Douglass said, "That's that. He admits I'm his slave anyway. He's sending some thugs up to try to recapture me." And the fact is that those thugs could have done that, and nobody in Massachusetts, where Douglass was safe harbor in a Quaker town, could stop it. So William Lloyd Garrison arranged for Douglass to run to England in 1845 because he didn't have papers of manumission. He didn't have free papers. He was a runaway slave. He was very brave to come out from under his cover and come out and say, "Here's my story. I'm telling you the story of slavery from the voice of a slave." The full title of his book is called "The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave," written by himself. He himself wrote it, not an interlocutor, not a white go-between. So now he has to flee to England. He spends from 1845 to 1847 sheltered in England by the Quakers, by the English Quakers, and safe in England there. But he wants to come back to the United States and promote the cause of anti-slavery. He can't do that safely because no northern state can protect him. Why? Fugitive slave law. So the Quakers say, well, let's buy Frederick Douglass from his master. And they get together the money, and they hire lawyers in both New York and Baltimore that have to go back and forth about the price for about 6 or 8 months. And Douglass is waiting and waiting and waiting, and his wife and children are waiting back in Massachusetts for this to be resolved. And finally, the Quakers of England pay Thomas Auld $1,200 for the life of Frederick Douglass, and he signs the free papers of manumission, meaning set free. But his master didn't set him free. He got a perfectly good greenbacks $1,200 for his slave. Who set Frederick Douglass free? Not his master, the English Quakers. His master never gets the moral credit for having been a nice guy and free such an excellent slave as Frederick Douglass. The only people who get credit are the English Quakers. But why did they have to do that? Fugitive slave law. And this is what Douglass and Lincoln are talking about when they say, no, the Constitution is not on the side of the grounds of the fugitive slave law or the law of popular sovereignty. The Constitution has a different answer in mind, and that is what Lincoln has just outlined. So we've gone a little bit around the barn here, but these famous lives like Frederick Douglass having his narrative circulate massive numbers of copies in both the North and in England, helping to sway England to the cause of anti-slavery too. Now, are there slaves over in England? Think about that a minute. Do English people have slaves among them, slaveholders among them? England has sent ships around the world trading slaves big time. English entrepreneurs have made tons of money buying and selling slaves. But are there slaves in England?
I think England outlawed slavery, certainly before the U.S. did. William Wilberforce was a strong advocate, I think, for removing the possibility of slavery.
That's true. Thank you, Judy. But they were only talking about their colonies. They were not talking, of course, by implication, they'd be talking about the room, but were there in fact slaves in England? The answer is no. The Dutch ships also had traveled all around the world, making tons of money, buying and selling slaves, bringing them hither and yon, populating many of their colonies with slaves, but were there slaves in the Netherlands? The answer is no. Were there slaves in France? Again, France was fighting to control Haiti, and they certainly had plenty of French planters going to Haiti and making big money off of the sugarcane business and having slaves die in 7 years with the exhaustion of the labor. But were there slaves back in France? The answer is no. Only the United States, because they were a colony in the beginning, had slaves there to begin with.
So slavery is an aspect of colonization.
Well, these countries were able to justify or find biblical support for having slaves in their colonies, but they probably thought it wasn't that healthy to bring slaves home. You know, bad things might happen if they had a slave population in their own country. So when Douglass went to England, most people he spoke to had never seen a Black person. We have to realize how, quote, innocent the European countries were with respect to knowing firsthand what it really meant to have slaves in your midst, that your own peers and colleagues and people just like you, whether they were tradespeople or earls and nobles who could afford to buy other people, they didn't have that face-to-face, this is it, this is what it really is, to look at. They just had, oh, well, in the colonies, they have different kinds of slave gangs and they have to blah, 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 all these justifications, but did they bring the slaves home? No. So in Europe, it's a completely different picture. It's very easy for the British to say, oh, we're so pure. In our colonies, we abolished slavery in 1842, which they did. So now Douglass comes over to England. And he says when he has to go there because of the danger to him back home of the fugitive slave law.
You're talking Frederick Douglass now.
Frederick Douglass. This is Frederick Douglass now, with the great big hair, and he's 6'4", and he's this extremely handsome, articulate orator. And he says, I'm going to use a lever. He says a lever has more power the more distant it is. So he says, I'm going over to England. And they're very self-righteous about freedom, because they freed their slaves in 1842. Well, yes, they did, but that's only in the colonies. So now England says, oh, you people in America, you're so big on freedom, and you threw us off in a violent war because we didn't believe in freedom and you believed in freedom. Well, here we are, we've liberated our slaves. So what's the matter with you? And Douglass's leverage actually worked very powerfully because he was so effective as an orator, and it is such a heartrending story to tell. The narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass today was my American literature students' favorite reading of everything they read in American Literature Survey. Poe, Hawthorne, Melville, you know, Whittier, Longfellow, put them all aside. They liked Douglass the best, because to them, it was the most human, the most real, and the most right and heartrending. So even today, Douglass's little narrative from 1845 has great power. And these vivid stories about what it was actually like to be a slave. Douglass said the character, like the printed letter is a character, and then also the character of slavery is written on my back. And he meant the scars on his back were the character of slavery. And so he and Theodore Weld and other abolitionist speakers, but not very many of them being slaves, had these powerful messages putting American slavery right in the face of the American. Another one of Theodore Weld's books is called American Slavery as It Is. And American Slavery as It Is a work of journalism where he and the Grimke sisters, who you've probably heard of, Angelina and the other Grimke sisters, Weld married one of those sisters, and together they created this amazing work, gathering from Southern newspapers accounts and ads for runaway slaves. And the ad would say something like, wanted, a slave named Romeo. He's missing one thumb. That's how you can tell who I'm talking about. And we cut it off because he tried to run away before. He's had his tongue sliced because the master cut it off to punish him. And his back is quite scarred because those would be the ads. telling what mutilations had been done to the slave, this runaway slave that now had finally escaped, and they were trying to find him and offering a reward. And those extremely vivid, this is American slavery as it is. Don't tell me about the plantation where everybody's happy and the maids are dusting the parlor and the slaves are singing happy songs. This is slavery as it is, said American slavery as it is. So again, these powerful works of journalism and revelation creating revolution as Americans really faced what slavery actually was in their midst. So all of these things are happening while the South is becoming more and more and more extreme in their position, not saying, oh, slavery is a necessary evil. We have to have it because we need the labor, or we have to have it because we have no other way of growing cotton and that's our livelihood. Or saying, well, it's something we're using for now. But you know, in the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore of heaven, where God will wipe away all tears and all differences between mankind. But here on earth, God has created a ladder. And some people have to accept their low position on that ladder, and they have to be patient and suffer. We all suffer our afflictions, but in the sweet by and by, slavery will be erased to us. They can't take that position anymore. They have to go all the way over to say, slavery, God loves slavery. God created slavery for the good of mankind. And we go, oh man, give me a break. But that is the position that many were taking.
Linda, we have a question.
Yeah.
The question is, I noticed that you had a question mark after the words Lincoln's greatest speech. In light of the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural, do you think it truly is Lincoln's greatest speech? Or is it instead Lincoln's most important speech? Because without it, he probably would not have been elected president without the speech.
Fabulous question. That is fabulous. Well, I think in terms of political importance, each of these speeches had amazing power to unify people. The Gettysburg Address had some power through its image of one nation as a body to unify people after this unbelievably horrible war had taken place. But I personally believe that the Cooper Institute Address, both in its rhetorical beauty, the power of the speech itself, and its immediate consequence, its rightness for its time, because it's not just us 100 years later who are saying, oh, this is really a beautiful speech. Look at the rhetoric, look at the power, look at the images and the sentences. No, it's not discovered later, like it was buried for a long time, like, you know, Gettysburg was not completely famous in its own time. Some people didn't realize the speech was over. It was so short. And House Divided, or the second inaugural with its very beautiful images of healing, are not as great to me as Cooper Union, because Cooper Union appealed to the highest possible level of human appeal. I mean, he was reaching into both the hearts and the minds of people who had to pay attention to a detailed and extended political and moral and spiritual statement that this becomes, and listen to its argument. And I think in this day and that day, people have short attention spans and they're easily distracted by things. And they had to call upon their ability to listen to something extended and then be moved by it. And to watch Sam Waterston re-render this speech in 2004 and have a spectacular effect on a public audience at that time of today's people like ourselves who might have been there in 2004 to listen to this and gave a standing ovation and just went crazy with how powerful this speech is when it's delivered. I feel sorry. I used to feel sorry for my students trying to struggle with Shakespeare because Shakespeare is so hard to deal with, written on the page. You have to have tremendous imagination of what it would be like enacted. Today, students can watch the whole play done. But this speech, too, needs to be delivered to have its full power, I think. You have to have do you all agree? It takes quite a verbal imagination to just read it on the page and see its power in the way it builds. So what I'd like to do in just a few minutes after we answer any other questions that we have is go to our clips of the speech. And Susan, I think we're ready. Are there any other questions right now? Or
I have a question. Could you just briefly summarize his main point to the Southern people and his main point to the Republicans? Those are the two sections that we focus on for this week, and
Okay.
I want to make sure that you cover the ground that's there.
I would say that if we go to page 9, the first sentence of each paragraph following that are the 4 points that he makes in this section. Number 1, you consider yourselves a reasonable and just people. So that is calling upon them now to be reasonable and just. Number 2, next paragraph down, you say we are sectional. He says we are only sectional because we don't get votes in your region. When we get votes in your region, which he hoped would happen, then we won't be sectional anymore. The next paragraph elaborates on that and says, you say that Washington warned against sectionalism. I say that you're the ones guilty of sectionalism. Okay, then next paragraph on page 10, but you say you are conservative. Again, that conservative card, Lincoln goes, whoop, that card's in my hand. I'm the conservative. So he has proven because he is in line with the forefathers, therefore he is conservative. So that's the next point that is made here. The next point down, again, you say we have made the slavery question more prominently than it formerly was. He says, again, if we would go back to the forefathers' answer, we would have the relative peace that we had up until 1820, 1830. That was a delicate balance where the country was held together around the forefathers' idea. You charge that we stir up insurrections among your slaves. And that was particularly about Harper's Ferry, because we don't have any blame for Harper's Ferry. You haven't pinned Harper's Ferry on a single Republican. You have not nailed a single Republican as having any role in Harper's Ferry. Bring it forward. If you make that charge, you have to back it up with charges that will hold up against some Republican. And he says John Brown was no Republican. So he answered that question. Then he says slave insurrections are no more common now than they were before. And he's right about that. Statistically, there were slave insurrections in all times. And then he says something else. There will always be slave insurrections, but they will always fail in America because there will always be one slave who's on the inside track who loves his master. And so he will tell. There'll always be a tattletale because, as you say, some slaves love their masters. So they'll tell on an insurrection. Therefore, insurrections in America will fail. Lincoln is not trying to do warmongering or fear-mongering based on slave insurrections in this speech, I think. He's saying it would be extremely difficult for American slaves to mount a successful insurrection, and that was proven at Harper's Ferry. And John Brown's effort was peculiar. And then by the end of 12, he makes his summation of this section. But you will break up the Union rather than submit to a denial of your constitutional rights to bring slavery into the North. That has a reckless sound. Now on page 13, he's working up to the summa or the summation of his middle section here that he has addressed to the Southerners. Now he's saying, you are being reckless and that Douglas is being impudently absurd. In other words, he's lying to the people about what side the forefathers are on. And then because the people don't have the access to history that Lincoln and Douglas do, he gets away with lying to the people. And through fakery and lying to the people, Douglas the fake is drawing people into a very sad delusion that breaking up the Constitution is the answer, or that they could win a war. And then he attacks the Dred Scott decision in a section there where he says what's wrong with the Supreme Court's decision about Dred Scott. And then on page 14, we enter the third part of the speech. And so pages 9 through 13 are his middle section addressed to the Southerners. That's quite a significant segment of this speech where he has this mock debate with the Southerners. speaking directly to them. Now, I'd like to go, I think you'll see that in this next clip, which Susan is going to play now, where Sam Waterston will enact this rising section, the next section that I've taken out as a clip we can watch. Susan, are you ready to click on part 2 here?
I am. I just wanted to, just to make sure that you have your eye on time.
Yes.
I have this as 15 to 18 minutes. So just why don't you interrupt if you get to a point where you want me to stop?
Can you, all right, I don't want to take that much time.
That's what I was thinking. So I can start playing it and you simply just need to interrupt and I can stop it and forward it as we go along. We'll work as a team.
Why don't you start in about the middle of the clip? Because what we wanted to get was this build that he's doing. I think I kind of outlined. So start in about, can you just move to about the middle of the clip?
Yeah, it's 18 minutes long and it's starting at 20. So I'm going to go to 29.
Okay, let's start at,
In
start
1784,
at 20.
3
Let's
years
do it in
before the
minutes.
Constitution, the United States then owned the Congress. Territorial organization to that part of it which now constitutes the state of Louisiana. New Orleans, lying within that part, was an old and comparatively large city. There were other considerable towns and settlements, and slavery was extensively and thoroughly intermingled with the people. Congress did not, in the Territorial Act, prohibit slavery. But they did interfere with it, take control of it in a more marked and extensive way than they did in the case of Mississippi. The substance of the provision therein made in relation to slaves was, first, that no slave should be imported into the territory from foreign parts. Second, that no slave should be carried into it who had been imported into the United States since the first day of May 1798. Third, that no slave should be carried into it except by the owner and for his own use as a settler. The penalty in all the cases being a fine upon the violator of the law and freedom to the slave. This act also was passed without yeas and nays. In the Congress which passed it, there were 2 of the 39. They were Abraham Baldwin and Jonathan Dayton. As stated in the case of Mississippi, it is probable that they both voted for it. They would not have allowed it to pass without recording their opposition to it if, in their understanding, it violated either the line properly dividing local from federal authority or any provision of the Constitution. In 1819 and 20 came and passed the Missouri question. Many votes were taken by yeas and nays in both branches of Congress upon the various phases of the general question. 2 of the 39, Rufus King and Charles Pinckney, were members of that Congress. Mr. King steadily voted for slavery prohibition and against all compromises, while Mr. Pinckney has steadily voted against slavery prohibition and against all compromises. By this, Mr. King showed that in his understanding, no line dividing local from federal authority, nor anything in the Constitution was violated by Congress prohibiting slavery in federal territory. While Mr. Pinckney, by his votes, showed that in his understanding there was some sufficient reason for opposing such prohibition in that case. The cases I have mentioned are the only acts of the 39 or of any of them upon the direct issue which I have been able to discover. to enumerate the persons who thus acted as being 4 in 1784, 2 in 1787, 17 in 1789, 3 in 1798, 2 in 1804, and 2 in 1819-20, there would be 30 of them. But this would be counting John Langdon, Roger Sherman, William Few, Rufus King, and George Reed each twice, and Abraham Baldwin 3 times. The true number of those of the 39 whom I have shown to have acted upon the question, which by the text they understood better than we, is 23, leaving 16 not shown to have acted upon it in any way.
Okay, Susan, I think
Here
we
then.
can stop right there.
We have 23 out of our...
Okay, so he's gotten down to, this shows how calmly, in what a low voice and with what clarity and detail, Lincoln is delineating the voting records of the 21 forefathers who he says displayed this understanding of the power of the federal government. And I would say that this is, Sam Waterston is outstanding at making clear how it was delivered and how clear it really was. Now, I'd like Susan to go to the 3rd clip and go about halfway through it. Because
have
then
23.
get to the next section of the speech and give us just a slice of this so that we have enough time left for at least 25 minutes of discussion. So let's take about the latter part of the 3rd clip.
And does not such affirmation become impudently absurd when coupled with the other affirmation from the same mouth that those who did the 2 things alleged to be inconsistent understood whether they really were inconsistent better than we, better than he who affirms that they are inconsistent? It is surely safe to assume that the 39 framers of the original Constitution and the 76 members of the Congress which framed the amendments thereto, taken together, do certainly include those who may be fairly called our fathers who framed the government under which we live. And so assuming, I defy any man to show that any one of them ever, in his whole life, declared that, in his understanding, any proper division of local from federal authority or any part of the Constitution forbade the federal government to control as to slavery in the federal territories. I go a step further. I defy anyone to show that any living man in the whole world ever did prior to the beginning of the present century, and I might almost say prior to the beginning of the last half of the present century, declare that in his understanding, any proper division of local from federal authority or any part of the Constitution forbade the federal government to control as to slavery in the federal territories. To those who now so declare, I give not only our fathers who framed the government under which we live, but with them all other living men within the century in which it was framed, among whom to search, and they shall not be able to find the evidence of a single man agreeing with them. Now, and here, let me guard a little against being misunderstood. I do not mean to say that we are bound to follow implicitly in what our fathers did. To do so would be to discard all the lights of current experience, to reject all progress, all improvement. What I do say is that if we would supplant the opinions and policy of our fathers in any case, we should do so upon evidence so conclusive, an argument so clear, that even their great authority, fairly considered and weighed, cannot stand. and most surely not in a case whereof we ourselves declare they understood the question better than we. If any man at this day sincerely believes that a proper division of local from federal authority or any part of the Constitution forbids the federal government to control as to slavery in the federal territories, he is right to say so and to enforce his position by all truthful evidence and fair argument which he can. But he has no right to mislead others who have less access to history and less leisure to study it into the false belief that our fathers who framed the government under which we live were of the same opinion, thus substituting falsehood and deception for the truthful evidence and the fair argument.
Okay, thank you. We can cut right there. Waterston, when he delivers this last very powerful statement that Douglas has no right to misrepresent the forefathers, he's not yelling. He was yelling a minute ago. Douglas is using the whole range of going up to almost a 10 in the emphasis of his speech. But then when he delivers almost the most powerful part of it, Douglas has no right to try to preempt the forefathers in his ridiculous, absurd, and false cause. He said all those things, not in a high voice, but in a low, sincere, heartfelt and pleading voice to say, hear me, listen. And if you look at the faces of the people listening to this, they're smiling one minute when he's making his absurd point about how silly this is, and they are totally nailed to the podium. They're really wrapped in their attention at that point where after this long speech, Waterston is representing Lincoln's quiet, urgent, sincere conviction. After all, he knows that it could be war at stake in the country and that the Republic is in the hands of the people now as it never has been before. So I think with that, we'll open it up to questions and discussion that you've seen here. From there, he's talking to the Republicans about the Republican platform and underscoring that the Republicans are going to be united, to know what they stand for, to have a clear platform, and then be both respectful of the Southern people, and reaching out, not calling people baboons or monkeys or idiots or evil people, but appealing to the reason and the justice that should be the common concern of every American. So let's open it up now to further discussion on your part about, is this in fact Lincoln's most powerful speech in the way that it did work upon the people and in the political situation of its time?
If anyone wants to ask a question, please be sure your mic is unmuted. Everyone's mic is now currently muted except for Judy Pars.
He laid out in his speech, his platform for what was happening in the United States and his forces, where they were directed, right there. There should be no doubt about what things were about.
Mm-hmm. That was Susan Harrington, I think, was it?
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah, please identify yourself prior to asking the question. Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, me?
Yeah, go ahead and respond. Were you through responding to her observation?
Yeah. I'm agreeing that I think he laid out extremely clearly why popular sovereignty is a mishmash. It's inconsistent, it's hogwash, it's inconsistent with the forefathers and inconsistent with itself. And as we laid out, the Democrats fell apart. Douglas couldn't unify the Democrats around popular sovereignty. He tried, but when he realized what a terrible failure it was, he got in line behind Lincoln as the election proceeded. And he campaigned, realizing that the South had turned against the Northern positions. He desperately campaigned across the South for Lincoln before the actual election. Trying to reunify the country and realizing that war was at stake. And I didn't realize until earlier last week that Douglas died in 1861, exhausted. He was just exhausted. He was unfortunately doing too much drinking and his whole body had become run down, and he died of typhoid in 1861. So had Douglas been elected, he never would have survived. He didn't survive any longer than Lincoln did.
Linda, may I read what I consider to be one of the most powerful parts of that last section? I'm
Yes.
going to read for about 2/3 of the way down on page 15. And he's talking again about whether slavery is right or wrong. Nor can we justifiably withhold this on any ground save our conviction that slavery is wrong. If slavery is right, all words, acts, laws, and constitutions against it are themselves wrong. And it should be silenced and should be silenced and swept away. But if it is right, we cannot justly object to its nationality, its universality. If it is wrong, they cannot justly insist upon its extension, its enlargement. They all ask, we could readily grant if we thought slavery right. All we ask they could is readily grant if they thought it wrong. They're thinking it right, and our thinking it wrong is the precise fact upon which depends the whole controversy. I think this is the nucleus of the entire to the speech, I think, and he delivers it very well, better than I did.
Thank you, Judy. He's saying the moral question, right versus
Yes.
wrong, is the central question. Now, if we're not talking about the Bible here, when are we going to talk about the Bible? That's where most people say that our ideas of right and wrong come from. So that's where I'm saying that, yes, the Bible's in the background. And Fred Johnson spoke to the Third Reformed Church adult education group about slavery this past Sunday, and it is on record. Fred Johnson said that slavery came first, and the rationale for slavery was developed by the Southerners because they already had slavery in their midst. The more it was in their midst, the more they needed to rationalize it and say, well, it's a necessary evil, then say, well, it's a mixed bag, and then to say slavery is good. And here Lincoln is directly confronting that problem, the moral issue, and saying that it is the underlying issue. So it's true that the Bible doesn't come into this directly. And it's true that he didn't start his speech by saying, well, now slavery is wrong, and try to put that huge statement over. He starts in a very specific place, but here, as Judy said, he lands the whole speech on what is the underlying issue here. Thank you. But then he follows up with saying, wrong as we think slavery is, on the bottom of page 15, we can yet afford to let it alone where it is. And this is the other part of the Republican platform that Lincoln is emphasizing, and the Republicans stood with throughout the election, saying wherever slavery is, it is legal, and we will not challenge it. And then he goes further with that, and he says, not only will we not challenging it, but we will willingly and enthusiastically endorse slavery where it already is. Think what an amazing statement that is after what Lincoln has just said about the moral issue. And that if the South had been able to listen to that message and believe that Lincoln meant what he said, there might still have been room to avoid the Civil War. But they didn't believe. They were being so consistently brainwashed and told Lincoln is coming down here with his armies and he's going to burn and destroy and take away your slaves. And because of that extreme mistrust and fear-mongering that was occurring in the South, there just were not enough people who heard the message clearly enough that the Republicans were trying to project, that although they believed slavery wrong, they were still committed to the forefathers' position of leaving it alone where it already existed. And then I was wondering whether the phrase right makes might, which we've all heard, originated in this speech, or whether Lincoln was using an already well-known saying, right makes might. I didn't have time to look that up, but it's possible that this speech certainly reiterated that idea, that if your cause is right, then the cause itself creates might. Now, a lot of people have said that, of course, the North won the war. They had 22 million people. They were way more industrialized. They had all the power to move the goods, create the goods, and they had the power to execute a war and the money to execute a war. And so we've also almost said, well, because of mechanics, the North won the war. But Lincoln had said it's moral rightness that in the end won the war for the North. And does that just hang in the air? Are all wars won because God blesses those who are right in matters of war and gives them the battle? Like giving them the Battle of Jericho? We don't really probably hold that to be true about wars in general. Certainly the righteous side loses wars in some cases. But Lincoln here believes that in this situation, the fact that the Republican position is what it is will rally the will of the people around this righteous idea. What do we think about that as being the final reason that this is such a powerful speech? That he's not just saying, we're bigger than you are, our armies can destroy you. Remember that we have a great mighty power, and if we are called upon to use it, we can. Is that threat in this speech as well? Is he anywhere that you can see saying to the South, look, if you want to provoke a war you're going to get. And once you've provoked war, like fire on Sumter, and don't give up and seize our forts, you don't have a chance.
He was not playing the power card. He was playing the right versus wrong card. Basic fairness. All men are created equal. It's right in the Bill of Rights or the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, one of those big statements. All men are created equal. And it seems to me that when you deny that and you treat people as if they're not equal, that it's self-evidently wrong.
What is the famous saying about the big stick that another famous president, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt, said what?
Speak softly and carry a big stick.
Speak softly and carry a big stick. Is there an element in this speech of Lincoln saying to the South, we're speaking softly, but we carry a big stick?
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because it goes without saying? Or do you think that the South truly did not realize the power of the North to create that blockade around the entire coast of the South, from all the way around the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast, to just blockade that whole area, can't get through, and to control the Mississippi, which they ultimately did. So the South is boxed in, and then to carry on land battles sufficient to do the job.
Well, they may have thought that the federal government would just let them leave. Some presidents would have.
Yes. In very early letters that Lee wrote to Jefferson Davis, he said We cannot destroy the North. Well, that's obvious. But maybe we can harass them enough that they'll get so bothered, like you ran into a swarm of bees and you just got to leave it behind.
Yep.
And that's what they were hoping, that they could annoy the North enough. So what did Lincoln have in this speech that caused the North to send their sons south to fight the war? Albertus Stephen Ralty sent 2 of his sons to fight in the Civil War. And in Holland, Michigan itself, or in Michigan, there were 54, just among the Dutch people in these little clusters, there were 54 men who volunteered to go down and fight the war. Did they realize what they were getting into? Or were they too a little deluded, like we're going to fight for the right, and it's not going to cost us that much?
Weren't they fighting to preserve the Union initially, at least?
I believe that Lincoln's speech created that reality in the minds of the people, that they were not just fighting against somebody who shot at one of our forts, but that the Union stood to be lost if the South was allowed to secede. I mean, the Union would be lost, and therefore, what would happen if the Union was lost and the South was a separate country? France was waiting to swoop in. They swooped into Haiti. Spain was waiting to swoop in. Britain would be happy to swoop in if they could, if they thought the South was destroyed enough by the Civil War and weak enough at the end of the Civil War. Maybe they'd had their independence. Maybe they were a separate country now, so we're not going to protect them anymore. And why would we? Who's going to protect them? From England, France, Spain. We think it unthinkable that those countries would again establish a beachhead on the North Atlantic coast and claim whole territories again. But some historians that I have seen believe that if by some different fate, the South had been permitted to form a confederacy and continue to be a separate government without the protection of the United States, they would have been extremely vulnerable to invasion by just even entrepreneurs or wealthy money from, you know, who knows, Russia, Soviet Union, China, whoever is your enemy of the day, your foreign power of the day that could conceivably have power to come over here and make a foothold. Does anyone have any comments about whether Lincoln overstated his case in any way in this speech? Why at Gettysburg does there still stand a monument celebrating and glorifying the Confederate soldiers who fought at Gettysburg?
Perhaps out of a sense of fairness. I think the Gettysburg Address was intended to heal some wounds. We had a war, we want to now bring about a peace, and it meant some concessions maybe to the other side.
Yeah, except the war wasn't over then. It was more of a speech that was, we need to win this war to make these sacrifices worthwhile.
Ah, good point.
Good point. Good point. Gettysburg
Yes.
was given in the midst of the war, not after the war was over. Mhm.
I think
And Lincoln-
also,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think also that the Gettysburg Address was a proclamation to the South to give up instead of, I mean, actually requesting them to surrender instead of go through more of this, more of the defeat that they were facing at that particular time.
Okay.
Mhm.
What was the other way that farmers or businessmen or mothers and fathers in the North during the Civil War could legally avoid having their sons be drafted.
They pay money, didn't they?
They could pay money
They hired substitutes.
to hire a substitute. My grandpa Walvard, a cheese farmer in Wisconsin, did pay $600, was what I think he paid, to get his son excused from the war. And I've thought about that because Wisconsin was one of the states that sent quite an impressive number of men to the war. Wisconsin and Michigan, Iowa, the Midwestern states really did their part in sending soldiers into the war. I wonder if people could pay their way out in the South. I don't think so. But maybe. John, do you know the answer to that?
Actually, I don't. I don't know the answer to that.
Kit, I think, has her hand up.
Kit, do you have a question? Kit, could you unmute your mic, please, so we can hear you? Do you have a question, Kit?
Oh.
Could you
She waved her hand by accident, maybe.
Oh, all right. She doesn't know that her mic is muted. So.
Okay. How many of you were able to tune in and listen to the whole speech with Sam Glover doing it? I mean, Sam Waterston doing it. And Tom, did it really hit you right between the eyes when you were able to listen to the whole thing? Oh,
Tom, can you unmute your mic, Tom? We can't hear you. Tom, we can't hear you.
Wait a minute.
There you go. All right.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, parts of it did hit me between the eyes. Hard to say exactly what part, but there were just sentences that you know, hit me between the eyes. And I found I had to go back a lot of times, back to a previous paragraph. Maybe that's just my inability to coordinate things, but it was a hard read, really. I mean, the reading of it and the listening of it was hard too. There's a lot of things he says in there that you have to kind of absorb, but there were things in there that hit me between the eyes, yes. But it wasn't an easy read or an easy thing to watch. I mean, it required a lot of concentration.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Linda, we have a question from Jane Schuler.
Okay.
Tom, if you're through with your comments. Jane Schuler's question is, when and where do we have opportunities today for such orators?
Good question.
That's from Jane.
Good question. If HASC recommended to Hope's theater or oratory departments to replicate on Hope's campus what was done in 2004 with Sam Waterston, or to bring Sam Waterston here or something, to do in our midst a reenactment of Lincoln's speech and have the appropriate, you know, introduction done here. How effective do you think it would be for an audience of people in Holland, Michigan today to listen to this speech as an oratorical performance?
Very.
Yeah, very much.
Do you think the feeling of the audience, I mean, you looked at their faces and you saw such a communal response, you know, like a congregation that's really been touched by what the pastor is saying or whatever, and kind of proving that the great art of oratory maybe hasn't completely been lost in our culture. How many of you know that at one time Hope College was a national competitor in the field of oratory at a very high level? we were producing orators like beautiful flowers in a garden. And oratory was taught in high schools and in popular community organizations. Both of my grandparents met in an organization called the Lansing County Cultural and Debate Society. These were farmers, and both women and men, and local people who really enjoyed and for fun or an entertainment would have debate societies proposing different questions. Like there would be resolved that women should seek higher education. That was the subject of a debate in which my grandmother, who had only a 5th grade education, competed. And we still have a copy of her speech, and it's funny and fun, and it was just something that was done as people did that in communities.
Linda, the closest equivalent that I can think of to this would be the series that Milt Nussma put together called Inventing America, where he brought in speakers that were imitating early the founding fathers. And I do remember the Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty or give me death" speech that was proclaimed from the very stage of the DeWitt Theater not too long ago.
Yep. There would be other speeches like that. Like, for example, Frederick Douglass's typical speech was more than an hour long. He would get a huge audience together and he would speak for an hour, and the people would be calling more at the end of the speech. It was like a frenzy.
Sounds like.
Yeah, this speech doesn't yell at people for an hour. It has high and low, and as we said, some of its most important themes are coming through in almost a whisper, or to exploit that power of the language to be slow and soft at some points and extremely colorful and dramatic at other points.
I think that Lincoln's use of repetition, he repeated and repeated his premise and always had something to back up what he was defending, and definitely did a good job of that. It's amazing that people could stay there that long for a speech and not be saying, "What's going on here? Why is this?" So it was remarkable that he even got it done.
Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now 11:03, and people can leave or stay for a few more minutes of discussion if they'd like. And we now plan to wrap up this class in at 11:15 in about 10 or 12 minutes.
I think that in Lincoln's day, more people were attending long church services and long sermons, so they were more accustomed to putting up with long speeches. We have shorter attention spans in the 21st century.
Yes. But that doesn't mean that we don't all have that human capacity to become compelled by the power of the rhetoric that's used here. Rhetoric just effective communication to an audience. So that power that can be summoned. And so I think it would be very interesting if HASP kind of worked with theater department or something to have some impersonations of maybe a speech of Douglass, a speech of Lincoln, where they are long speeches where oratory is really at its height. Thank you. A lot of participation that I thought was really good.
Was his audience of one voice, or were there dissenters there?
Well, they would have been mostly Republicans, but walking into that meeting, I don't think they had a clear idea what to expect of Lincoln. And I actually think that's an interesting question, because I think some people in the audience would have had some of the ideas that Douglass was appealing to, some of the wrong ideas that Douglass was appealing to. I think his audience learned a lot from this speech that they maybe didn't know before, even though Lincoln said at the beginning that these are old facts that everybody's familiar with. He was kind of complimenting his audience to assume that much. I think I read that 80% of his audience were white males, you know, who would be voters. And so it's hard to say.
He was kind of challenging them. These are old stories as to should you just as a whole believe old stories just because they're old?
Yes.
Do you go by tradition or do you think?
Yes. And sometimes the most powerful speeches are reinforcing what we already know, but they're giving us fire in the belly about it. They're giving us more of an idea why it's so important and why it can unify so much across a span of people. It is an ambivalent position to say we're going to protect slavery enthusiastically wherever it already exists, after having said, after all, we firmly and fervently believe that slavery is wrong, but we're going to protect it where it exists. That is an ambivalent position, but that is the position Lincoln is taking and going to support at that time.
Right. Isn't that then a critique of the speech? And in my view, makes it not his greatest speech, because he was taking a kind of a half-hearted approach. He wasn't taking a real abolitionist position, and yet he was perceived as such anyway by the South. So as you well know, his position then evolved over the time of the Civil War, where he first emancipated all the slaves in the states of the Confederacy, and then he proposed the 13th Amendment. But it was, to me, when you know something's wrong and you take a half-hearted position, I think that lessens the impact of the speech, viewing it 150 years or 60 years later, at least. At the time, it was, I'm sure, very controversial, but there were people who were far more abolitionist than Abraham Lincoln. I mean, they really thought slavery should end in the South as well as not be expanded to the territories.
Yes, but then the question would be how? How many people in the North were there that thought that the North should do what the South was afraid they were going to do? Raise an army, go south, and wipe out slavery and free the slaves wherever slavery existed. Now you have the freed slaves wandering around, not knowing what to do with themselves, unable to support themselves, not having, quote, jobs. And then you have the landowners who've been deprived of their means of raising crops and carrying on the plantations, and you have a completely destroyed economy. Is that what anybody who had a brain other than John Brown would propose? I mean,
No.
South is treating it as if there's no difference between John Brown and Abraham Lincoln. John Brown wanted to provoke the slaves to rebellion and completely abolish slavery right now in the South, no matter what, mayhem that would cause. Right. And Lincoln is completely different than John Brown. He's saying, John Brown was not a Republican, he says. So right. You're saying, yes, but there was a consistency about John Brown that is still admired today and was admired at that time. There were people who spoke of the significance of John Brown's Harper's Ferry disaster as if it were a martyrdom that we should reckon with.
Yeah, I guess I'm not promoting John Brown. I'm just saying the reason why I don't think this should be viewed as, in my view, Lincoln's greatest speech is that it comes up short in the morality department. That doesn't mean it's not a politically astute speech, because I think it was. That got him the Republican nomination probably, because without it, he wouldn't have gotten it. But I would just say, compared to the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural, maybe even the first inaugural, those I think were, in my view, better speeches.
That's interesting. Well, Lincoln is saying there's a role for expediency. He's not saying expediency is irrelevant.
Right.
He would say John Brown was right in principle, but what he did was completely foolish and inexpedient because it was immediately crushed, and he would accomplish nothing except polarization of the people. And so he's reserving the necessity argument that the forefathers had about slavery where it was.
Yep. Yeah. I've enjoyed your discussion, Linda. Thank you.
Well, thanks to all of you who contributed. I'm inspired by the fact that it seems like all of you stuck with the class and, you know, read what you brought to the table, what you had to give, and I enjoyed giving the presentation.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Excellent. Thank you, Linda.
And,
Very good job. Yes.
So it sounds like we're wrapping up. I will end the class right now. Linda, you've been wonderful. Thank you for putting
Thank
up
you.
with all the technology and everything else. And thanks for everybody on the call. So we'll see you soon.
Well, we had a very good tech today. Everything worked great today. So that was a blip last week.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye to
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Yay.